I think a lot of people who are coming here now to taste them out of bottle and who may have tasted them en primeur, out of barrel, or may have just read about them, are coming with a lot of negative mindset, which in many cases is no doubt justified. But I hope that in just the small group of wines that we've tasted today, you see that if people were very selective in the vineyards, were careful in their management in the cellars, especially where extraction is concerned, they could do a damn good job. Now, we're not looking for massive, powerful, structured, concentrated wines, but I think we'll have wines that are going to be great fun for people in a restaurant environment. They'll be at a reasonable price. And as you noted on several occasions, there's a lot of wines here that are delicious to drink right now. So I think we've done a lot better than was perhaps initially the concern. I think we saw that as well in 2012, which turned out to be much better than we initially thought. And I'm sure, as we talked about, that if we had been confronted with all that nature threw in our direction in 2013, 20 or 30 years ago, this would have been a total washout. But you tasted the wines today. I think there's a lot of good wines. They're not long-aging wines, but we don't need every vintage to be a long-aging wine. Well, I think that's because we're pushing the northern limits of where you can grow wine, even though those limits seem to be going farther and farther north lately. And the distinctive factor about that is you do get more vintage variation year in and year out. And that, I agree with you 100%, makes it much more fascinating. If every vintage is almost the same, as is the case in regions closer to the equator, it's not boring, but it's not nearly as rich and exciting. So yeah, I agree with that. And I think that this is a vintage that'll be a lot of fun where you pick and choose carefully, and you'll help people do that. That you're going to have a lot of near-term drinking pleasure. Well, we talked about that too. If this had been back in 72, 74, 77, 84, the wines would have been horrible. But we've made so much progress in the vineyards, in the selective picking, in the cellars, in the sorting, in the willingness and the ability of the chateau to say, okay, I'm only going to put 30% or 40% or 50% of my entire harvest into my Grand Vin, into my first label, and the rest will go into a second and third label. Those didn't even exist 20 and 30 years ago, with a few exceptions. So I think everything has moved up in terms of quality control and the ability technically to make the best wines possible. Wouldn't have been the case when I was a student back in the 70s, that's for damn sure. Bordeaux, I think, even though it gets bashed all the time, and some of the time it's probably warranted and justified, but not in terms of technique in the vineyards and in the winemaking. It's more about the pricing. But if you look at the techniques employed in the vineyards and in the winemaking and aging, I think Bordeaux is still where everybody comes to learn. It could be the best growers from California and many other regions around the world. This is where they come. And when a millionaire buys a property in Chile or in California, where does he come to get a consultant? Comes here. He picks up Michel or Stéphane or Philippe and so on. So I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on in Bordeaux. Unfortunately, too many journalists get obsessed with the whole price thing, and I understand that. It's very frustrating. But you can't not look at all the rest. And thankfully you don't. You look at the rest. And that's what we need people to do more of.